What is up, guys? Today I'm going to be giving you an in-depth breakdown of patch 6, which just released yesterday for Baldur's Gate 3. So let's dive right in, see what Larian has updated, because there are some huge changes that happened in patch 6. All right, guys, just going through some of the earliest changes, you see those new kissing animations. That's like the first thing that was a highlighter of this patch. I think this was kind of meant because it was after Valentine's Day, so they wanted to give a little bit more variety in some of the romance interactions. Now, one thing I really do like is those new camp animations. I think the camp system, just in general, I've talked about it in the past. I actually liked there to be some option to actually toggle a default camp because sometimes it can be confusing to find wibblers, to find everybody. The camp's always changing. But I like these new camp animations. I think this is going to spice the camp life up a little bit. And I've already looked in depth at the patch notes. And another thing right away they won't talk about here is there's a lot of new camp dialogue. Like Minfira, for instance, has a lot of new things to say while she's in camp, and some of it sounds pretty hilarious. So I think that's going to be really, really cool. Obviously, Hausen sharpening his knife here. Improvements and fix galore. Now, guys, the biggest thing here is those new legendary actions. So I think I'm going to have to dedicate another 50 to 70 hours to honor mode and see what the new honor mode is like, because several bosses definitely got buffed quite considerably in honor mode after these latest changes. Now, the Drider, for instance, has legendary actions, but there's several bosses like Kefrik that have gotten their difficulty increased. So honor mode definitely after these changes is more difficult than it used to be, and there's bosses that literally have legendary actions that never did before. So that's really, really cool, and I think that's amazing. Let's quickly look at the highlights now, and then I'm going to kind of dig into the patch notes and tell you some of the stuff that isn't in the highlights that I think you guys need to know. So one of the biggest highlights, you can dismiss a recruited companion from your party while speaking to the companion you want to replace them with. Guys, this was so needed. This was extremely annoying, especially on honor mode where you're changing out companions quite a bit. Honestly, just being able to talk to the person you want to recruit and dismiss the old person quicker is such a quality of life improvement, and I'm a big, big fan about that. When a dialogue triggers automatically, the game will try to prioritize your avatar character as the main speaker. This is kind of this can be good and can be bad, because not in all ways do you not want this to happen. A lot of times this could actually be bad for you, because let's say you have a charisma character that's in your party, right? And they have higher charisma than your main character, and they're the party face, and you have them in front. So I'm not really liking this change. I think there's going to be ways around this. You could ungroup the party and then try to use that charisma character to go ahead. But then what if you fail that check? So even though I understand what they were doing with this change, I'm not the biggest fan. I don't think this will actually be great, to be honest. Your partner now has different kisses. We've already talked about that. Romance has gotten an update. I think that's good, just to kind of have more variety in the game overall. Rework the reflection scenes that take place after wrapping up the defeat of the Neverbrain for characters without romantic partners to better match the scenes for those who do have romantic partners and to bridge the gap into the epilogue. I think most characters are going to have at least some romance, but I guess if you didn't at this point, that does make sense. I'm glad they are thinking about those players that perhaps just don't feel an affinity with any of the characters. So I can understand that. Added a new cinematic scene to support the combat encounters that occurs after you choose whether to side with the Night Song at Sorcerer's Sundries or not. That is actually really cool, because this is a part of the game that a lot of people don't talk about enough. Like, obviously in Act 2, right, the Night Song is a really, really big part of the whole story. But in Act 3, when you're actually, telling the Night Song, hey, this wizard Lorican has been, hunting you down, trying to hunt you. I'm glad they added a cinematic there. I think that will be really cool. I cannot wait to see it. So yeah, that's a really, really cool addition. We have the new idol animations that I had spoken about before. So Lizelle gets to study a Gif Yankee disc. I wish they would have put in a little bit more into Lizelle, because some of these actually have multiple ones, but that's not bad. Minfira contemplating a skull, tending to mushrooms, which is kind of interesting, but I guess it does make sense for a drow. Expressing violence adjusting her armor, plotting her future, and being bothered by the sun. So all of this, I think Minfira is the big winner here. She has so much added, and I really like that. Jafira sitting, kneeling, and whispering to a rat messenger and whittling. So that's kind of cool. Minsk cooking and shaving his head. These are two separate animations. Shadowheart polishing the spear of night. Shadowheart and Halcyon are probably the losers in this, in that it doesn't feel like they got much added. Halcyon just whittling. So, I guess it depends on who you really like to have around, like in terms of who your favorite characters are. I think if it's Halcyon or Shadowheart, this was kind of a minor addition. But honestly, like if this was Minfira or even Jaheira, I think this is, something. It's something pretty substantial. If you started your game on a set difficulty, you could now switch to custom mode. This is great for actually trying out things and kind of getting ready for honor mode before you want to commit to it. Fixed an issue that would prevent travel with Axe. I'm not going to talk about this too much. There's a bunch of bug fixes, which is fantastic, and I'm glad they have done bug fixes. Fixed the shield bash and the rebuke of the mighty passives not triggering saving throws. Guys, this is so huge. This makes shields actually way, way more viable than they were in patch 5 and before. I'm so happy about the shield bash change. I think this is absolutely fantastic. Added light bar columns for DualSense controller. That's great because if I do use controller, most of the time I use mouse and keyboard. But if I do use controller, I use a PS5 controller. So that's a nice little quality of life addition. If you romance Lizelle, grab a red dragon and saddle up, you can now join her in the rebellion against Valakith, even if you're not GIF yourself. This is fantastic because I think this was always kind of like Valakith, I really dislike a lot. I think, well, obviously she's like a fake god, right? But yeah, I think this is a absolutely fantastic, fantastic addition, and I think this is going to help the Lizelle plotline a lot, and I'm really interested by this. I want to actually see the scenes play out, so I think this is really a good fix. Fixed clashes on Xbox, obviously great, guys. Like I said, I'm not going to be going too deep into the bug fixes because they're huge, but yeah, it is really, really good. Gameplay. Now I'm just going to be going through the parts of these because this is so huge, guys. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of patches. So I'm going to be scanning through this, and I'm just going to be telling you what I think is going to be of big importance. So the changes that I think are significant from this point out. Okay, guys, I think the first significant change we have here, auto-selecting your camp supply before a long rest will use resources more optimally. Sometimes you don't feel like cooking. This was a big problem before because sometimes you would actually use grossly in excess of the camp supplies you would want to use, or you could use, like, let's say, like an owlbear egg as a camp supply. So there's things here that would be really, really bad. They've also talked about in this section that they will actually be able to go into resource boxes to use camp supplies. So I think this is just a great, great quality of life change, and I think this is fantastic. Okay, this is an interesting change, guys. Creating harmful surfaces beneath NPCs will now trigger a crime reaction. So I guess before you could somehow like create a poison pool or fire, and then it wouldn't count as attacking them. I've never seen that happen before, but that is very, very cool. And I didn't even know you could do that. This is a great addition. As a quality of life improvement, the pack weapon condition now remains after a long rest. This is going to help Eldritch Knight a lot. So I think for the EK flow builds, this is going to be a huge improvement and makes this build a lot less annoying to play. Okay, so this is interesting. Now we're getting into the combat section, which is, I think, where a lot of the biggest changes actually come out. The Shambling Mound is now a fully fledged honor mode boss with brand new bespoke legendary actions and tuned up abilities. Good luck. I don't know what to think about this. I just have to play it and I guess see. I'm not sure what they're even talking about the Shambling Mound. So this will be interesting to see in game, guys. The Drider and Drorazlik have new legendary actions. Now, this is really, really good. I think Drider especially, because the Drider seemed like a major character, and it kind of felt weird that, he didn't have, like, more, and he was actually quite easy. For Act 2, generally, if you're at the, like, most of the times, you should be at, like, late 7, mid 8, when you're actually fighting the Drider, so he was not very hard. Now, Dro Lazlik was already quite challenging. I would say probably one of the hardest like mini bosses at the Goblin Camp. So he's going to be even scarier, which I'm really, really excited to see. In Tactician mode, the Trido has a new sanctuary called Spiderweb Sanctuary that erupts in a psychic explosion when the status condition ends. In addition, his Spiderweb fanaticism aura will now debuff his enemies. So it sounds like they really buffed the Trido, and I think this is a really, really great change. The frightened condition applied by Kefrik's dreadful aspect will now correctly end the combat when Kefrik ends before the condition does. So that's good. This sounds like kind of a major bug fix for this condition specifically in the Kefrik fight. Okay. This is a great change, guys. Increases the number of valid methods for knocking out Menthira to recruit her. Obviously, this has always kind of been weird how the system worked. And I'm glad they're kind of making this more accessible because I think Menthira is an absolutely amazing, amazing character. And I think too few people get to play with her. So I think making it more viable to actually recruit her into the party is just such a good change. Another big one that I found in the flow and scripting that I really loved was that you can finally tell Halcyon that you found the letter that was sent to Kaga. So this is the letter basically explaining why Kaga basically tried to have an insurrection in the Druid Grove. So I think that makes a lot of sense because this is something that's like very, very vital and kind of basic to the story. Because Kaga just like rebels for no reason if you didn't have this letter. So yeah, I think this makes a lot of sense to be able to give this to Halcyon, and I'm really interested in how that cutscene would play out. Now we go into the UI changes, guys. Now this is really cool. The trade interface got a graphical overhaul clarifying which character is botting for the party, what the persuasion score is. So for those of you that don't know, the barter system was very complicated, guys. It had a lot of things that kind of affected the score. So part of that was how much gold you had donated to that specific vendor, and it actually changed based on level. So for instance, like at level 1, if you would donate 400 gold, you would get max reputation with that vendor. But the thing is, that wasn't the only factor. The other factor was also the charisma score of that character. It was actually a pretty in-depth mathematical computation. So basically, best case scenario, you de-level a character to level 1, you give a vendor 400 gold, and you have a character with very high charisma to get the cheapest discount on items. So yeah, this is kind of interesting, and I'm glad they kind of simplified the UI because I think in the way that it was originally in the original like alteration of this, it was confusing and it can really confuse people. The whole party's inventory is now present in the trade interface, which doesn't require you to switch characters to sell the items from the inventories anymore. Groundbreaking, guys. Huge, huge update. I'm so glad they did this. I think this is just absolutely fantastic. Rename the Camp Companions button to Camp Inventories to more clearly indicate what it does. That's fantastic. For those of you that don't know, this was kind of a hidden little feature where you could basically go into Camp Inventories. So what you could do is you could look at the inventories of people that you did not have in your party at the current moment. So this was kind of very important to be able to store things on them, to be able to get items off of them. I really like that they changed this. I think Camp Companions was confusing because you're like, what am I doing with Camp Companions? Camp Inventories is absolutely clear, and I like that a lot. Camp Chests are now integrated into the Camp Inventories UI. That's fantastic. I've already talked about this a lot, about how difficult it was to pull things from chests just in general. Now, the only thing I wish they would have changed here is I wish they would have had searchable your camp inventory chests. So that's something that I really, really want them to add because I think it's one of the single biggest UI changes that could be game changing is that you could just store most of your junk in the camp inventory and then you could literally search it with mouse and keyboard, just search for an item and it pulls those items out. And other games have already done this, and I really think Baldur's Gate needs to do this. I think it would be very, very good. This is a great one, guys. Added subsorting the throwable items on the hotbar so the most recently picked up items will appear first. So throw builds had this weird thing where sometimes, let's say if you threw a hammer, for instance, it would be the first item when you select throw again. But sometimes it would not, guys. Sometimes it would be literally dead last on the list of items you have. So it sounds like they've improved this, and it sounds like flow builds will benefit from this. So especially with the changes to EK in general, I like this a lot. I think that flow builds are just going to be, they have a lot of quality of life improvements from what I'm reading. Okay, let's go into writing changes now. When faced with certain choices after the Neverblade is defeated, you can now tell Lazelle to make her own decision. So, for those of you that don't know, I don't want to get too much in the spoiler here, but very, very bad things can happen to Lazelle if she makes the wrong choice after the Neverblade is defeated. So, this is really interesting, and I'm wondering how this will actually play out in game. I'm really happy that they added this. If you're romancing Shadowheart in Act 2, she will have more banter as you're walking around. I think this is just generally a good thing. Just Act 2 in general, I'm not only talking about Shadowheart, but just most characters. It feels like they have the least dialogue of all three acts. And I think if there's one act in Baldur's Gate that I would really like to see improved, it would be in Act 2. This is a great one. Cinematics, guys, I think a lot of people gonna. I just think this is huge. You can now give Shadowheart a hug when she's crying after losing or saving her parents. So this was an extremely emotional point in the story. And you basically, before you couldn't even comfort Shadowheart. So I really think this is a great addition, and I think this was a great change to the game. All right, guys. Finally, I'm going to be looking at the changes combat across the arcs. Now, there are an absolutely massive amount of these changes. Some of this, there's no way for me to actually cover all of this because it is huge. But I'm going to talk to you about several that I thought were very interesting. And so we're going to start with Act 1. Gave Drowazlik the ability to win spiders to his side. Now, we've already talked about this back in the Legendary Actions section, where Drowazlik, it seems like he got a big buff to the difficulty. So I'm really excited to see him on Honor mode and see what his challenge will be. Neo's Legendary Action now correctly triggers when he's attacked rather than when he attacks. Cut him some slack, being a true soul, a lot of pressure. We all get confused in his shoes. So Neo was already a hard fight. This may make it harder. I'm not 100% sure because most of the time, Neo got his legendary action off for me. So I'm not sure. Maybe this is something that just happened sometimes. I'm 100% sure. An enemy ogre tournament Vera's camp ambush now has fewer hit points in Explorer mode. I mean, that's not going to be huge, but it is interesting that they changed this specifically for Explorer mode. Now, this is probably the big one that I've seen for Act 2. Increase the difficulty of the Kefric encounters in Tactician and Honor mode. Kefric was already a very, very hard fight in Honor mode. Probably one of the most dangerous encounters in Act 2. So that they made this harder, I'm really, really interested to see. And I think people are going to be absolutely clamoring to join Honor mode. It was already difficult before, guys, and it sounds like they upped the challenge significantly. So we see here that the Apostle of Merkel, so Kefric's last phase, has several new abilities. Fingers of Death is now treated as a level 7 spell instead of a cantrip. The Apostle of Merkel's Consume the Faithful action and Gaze of the Dead legendary action should now ignore blindness from magical darkness as intended. So before you could actually cast a globe of magical darkness and it would basically mess up a lot of his legendary actions. It sounds like they fixed that. So obviously, Apostle of Merkel is become a lot harder, and he was already an extremely challenging boss fight. So I'm very interested to see how this actually plays out in game. Okay, and finally we get to Act 3 here, guys. Made several improvements to the combat with the Gondians, who will be much more careful. For example, we raised their dexterity to 14, gave them the blur spell, gave them better armor, and granted them light and medium armor proficiency. So it sounds like in most cases, guys, they are just buffing. I'm very happy to see this specifically. Made some updates to Lorroakin. He is now level 10 to more accurately reflect the challenge he poses. His Earth Mirmidon can cast Stone Skin. His Mirmidons and Crank can now all fly at will. He will cast magic armor on himself. So if you actually watched my boss tier list, I told you that Lorroakin was one of the biggest jokes in Baldur's Gate 3 and really posed no challenge when you reached him because most of the time you were already at least level 10, if not level 11. And he was honestly kind of a joke boss. So it sounds like they recognize this and they significantly up the challenge. And I'm really, really excited, guys, because ultimately it seems like the whole idea here is they make Honor mode even more of a challenge and to encourage people to go back and play Honor mode again. So Guys, there's so many changes that I haven't even been able to cover. I just tried to cover the most game breaking and actual, like, biggest changes. So I hope you guys really like this, guys. Please leave me down in the comments what you think of the patch. I will be leaving the full patch notes in the comments. I hope this helped you guys. Please let me know what you think my next video should be, and I will see you in the next one, guys.